roadmap's goals and objectives. We encourage you to ask your questions through the chat box, which is also being monitored. During these interactive sessions, you will learn more about the college's equity and inclusion roadmap for success. MC is committed to being an equity-minded institution. We seek to aim high and commit to amplify, integrate, and measure our work. By working together, we will continue to pursue equitable student outcomes, inclusive excellence in teaching and learning, and fair and inclusive employee experiences. We will raise our institution to a level of civility of which we can all be proud. Last Friday, we had the pleasure of having Miss Sharon Bland, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, where she provided a general overview of the work of PACEI and the roadmap. If you missed that insightful presentation, you can find that recording on the website for the Office of Equity and Inclusion. As we prepare to implement our 5 equity and inclusion goals for this academic year, based on the objectives researched by members of PACEI 2017 to 2019 work group, we look forward to an interactive discussion where you now provide us with your feedback. Today we have our amazing and hardworking co-chairs and committee, Professor Brandon Wallace, Dr. Milton Nash, and Dr. Lucinda Grinnell are our co-chairs for today, who will be leading our discussion. These co-chairs and their subcommittee members will be assisting the college in overseeing the implementation progress of goal number 1, which you'll hear more about today, and some of the objectives that are associated with it. Group 1, the space is yours.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So I am going to try to share my screen now. Just give me a moment to get set up. And so, the first thing I want to say is that Lucy and Brandon and myself will be presenting today, but I also want to recognize the rest of our group. Eric Benjamin, College-wide Dean of Education and Sciences, Social Sciences. David Bertol, who is the Director of the Science Learning and Maple Centers on the Germantown campus. Dr. Carlos Molina Rosales, faculty member in World Languages and Philosophy and part-time faculty senior associate for the Institute of Part-Time Faculty Engagement and Support. Katya Salmi, who's a faculty member in Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminal Justice on the Rockville campus. Marie Shahadi, Department Chair of Business, Economics, Accounting, Management, Computer Applications, and Paralegal Studies at Germantown at Tacoma Park. And Mr. James Snezik, College-wide Dean of Chemical and Biological Sciences. So even though the 3 of us will be presenting, I wanted to recognize the rest of our committee because they've also done a lot to contribute to this work. And several will also be helping us out in the breakout sessions. And so to begin this discussion, so in the write-up about this town hall, it was said that the work of our committee was about equity. And so I wanted to begin with a discussion of equity and what does that mean? And so this is a graphic that I found online. It's become my favorite graphic to kind of just explaining the difference between equality on the one hand and equity on the other. Some of you may be familiar with the children's story, the Giving Tree. And so this graphic is kind of modeled on a graphic from that story. And in the upper left-hand corner, you see a representation of inequality. So the Giving Tree is giving a little, more to a person on one side of the tree over the other, right? So this is here you see unequal access to opportunities. Equality in the lower left-hand panel here is a state now where you have evenly distributed tools and assistance, right? So each person is given the same set of tools, exactly the same, but you see in this setting, one person still has a greater advantage. In fact, they're better off now than they were before, whereas the person on the right, is still not, is having problems with access. And we contrast equality with equity in the upper right-hand panel. This is a situation in which, you might give custom tools that identify and address inequality. So now both people, both persons, seem to have an equal access to resources. And finally, a state of justice is where we fix the system altogether, right? We just address the underlying problems in the system so that everybody now has equal access and is getting the things they need. And so having set that stage, I want to now actually explain to you what goal 1 is. Goal 1, the equity and inclusion roadmap, goal 1 is to improve persistence, retention, and graduation transfer rates of all students, particularly African American male and Latinx students. And I began the conversation with equity because even in our group, the question arose of, okay, why are we focusing specifically on African American male and Latinx students, right? And so, first thing I want to say is, what we would like to have happen is we would like for all of our students 100% to persist. We would like to retain 100% of our students. We would like 100% of our students to graduate and transfer, right? Regardless of their gender, gender identity, or race, right? But we have specific data which indicates that Black males and Latinx students graduate at lower rates, right? We have specific data which says that there are issues with these specific subpopulations of students. And you see that in the following slide. So this is a graphic of MC data showing some of our disparities. On the left-hand side, you see a graphic representing graduation rates. So these are cohorts of first-time, full-time degree-seeking students in 2014 and 2015. And you see that all students, if you look at the population of all students, we see graduation rates respectively of 23% and 22% in 2014 and 2015. Now compare that with Black males on the leftmost side of this graphic and Latinx students in the center, and you see that there are significant disparities between these populations, right? And so what this goal means is we have a responsibility to address these specific inequalities that we see in our data. In the graphic on the right, this is a representation of GPA for the fall 2018 cohort. And again, you see on the left here, African American born Black males, have more than 50%, right? 53.4% have less than a 2.0 GPA, right? And then that is an astonishing number. And so we have an equity and inclusion goal specifically about addressing this inequality. So a few words on the roadmap itself. So the roadmap was assembled with the help of the subcommittees that you see here on this slide. You'll see here that they represent very broad areas of the college: student experience and college culture, disability inclusion, faculty teaching curriculum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. If we have committees of individuals with expertise and insight in these specific areas, they help us map out places where it makes sense to have smart equity and inclusion goals, right? And so if you look at the roadmap objectives, if you read the roadmap and look at the objectives listed there, the objectives are listed under these subcommittees, right? So more than 40 objectives categorized under each of these 8 subcommittees. Now, the work of my subcommittee, my group, was to go through the roadmap and read through the entire thing, and then to identify the objectives which we felt aligned very closely to our goal, right? So, I mean, it makes sense. So we had one group of subcommittees to assemble the roadmap, and then we're going to have another group of subcommittees where the objectives are closely aligned with the actual goals to implement the roadmap, right? To oversee the implementation of those objectives. And so what I will do for the next few minutes is tell you about the objectives that my subcommittee identified as aligning most closely with Goal 1. The first objective, and again, this makes sense, an increased number of African American male and Latinx students who graduate, transfer, and complete, right? And also, in addition, I mean, so from the faculty perspective, this makes sense, right? Hiring, retention, and promotion of African American male and Latinx full and part-time faculty. I mean, I think having diverse faculty is a good in and of itself. However, when seen within the context of retaining African American male and Latinx students, that representation in the classroom, I think, is extremely important. So those two things are tied together here in this objective. And this objective was to be found under the Student Experience in College Culture subcommittee on page 19 of the roadmap. The second of the 5 objectives that we identified, and it was to assess and measure student experience and sense of belonging at the college. And you see 2 very important components here. One was assessment and measurement, right? Because really, in order to do this work well, that measurement piece is extremely important. We actually, this is data-informed work, right? We've got to have something that tells us, you know, where are our problems, and when we actually try when we do something to address those problems, we need to also be able to, you know, say whether or not they're working, right? So you have to have a way of assessing and measuring the student experience, and also the sense of belonging. So when we're talking about students being retained at our institution and graduating, I think that has a lot to do with whether or not they feel that they belong at our institution, right? And this objective is listed under the subcommittee on nationwide peer institution best practices / assessment and evaluation / resources on page 31 of the Equity and Inclusion Roadmap. The third goal, and this kind of very closely tied to the one I just read, is to foster a sense of empowerment and a sense of belonging among diverse populations of the college, right? That makes sense, again, within the context of retention. And this is under the Reports and Communications Subcommittee on page 31 of the Equity and Inclusion Roadmap. Next, fourthly, to improve Montgomery College leadership's knowledge, skills, and awareness of racial and cultural issues. Right? So this is also under Reports and Communications. And lastly, the last of the 5 goals that we identified, training for student success. So to improve persistence, retention, and graduation transfer of all students, but especially those of African American male and Latinx students, through developing an academy for Latino and Black male students for tutoring, mentoring, and et cetera, and creating, supporting multicultural inclusion center spaces to serve as hubs for training, et cetera. So here we're seeing targeted interventions and programs, right? And my colleagues, Brandon Wallace and Lucinda Grinnell, will say more about that. I'm now passing the torch to them. Brandon, so I'll continue turning the slides, by the way.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Dr. Nash. So
just let me know when to go to the next slide.
Will do. Thanks so much for being here with us, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Professor Brandon Wallace. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education. My home campus is Tacoma Park, Silver Spring, and I'm excited to bring to you this forefronting, if you will, these data, specifically from a national perspective. So the problem is not necessarily specific to Montgomery College. However, it's a national problem. And so these data are taken from the Inside Higher Education and the National Center for Educational Statistics. And it reinforces what Dr. Nash has been saying. We have a huge problem in this country, specifically about wrapping around the internal and external supports for our Latinx students and our African American males. Next slide, please. This next slide shows data taken from Data USA, and it's the 2017 data. And what I love about this slide is it really does bridge the gap to what information that Dr. Nash shared with us earlier, and kind of making sure that we understand that this is a real problem. It's a problem at Montgomery College, it's a national problem, and we can do so much more together to make sure that the African-American males that we support graduate on time and with less debt, and more importantly, just persist and we retain them. And more importantly, our Latinx students also get that same encouragement and that love and that support, but more importantly, the institutional strength that we have at our helms to make sure that they're successful also. Next slide, please. This is a really interesting slide. Excelsior Education developed this, and you can see even from an educational or academic perspective, that's not good enough. Sometimes we have to look at workforce development. And so when we think about who's being lagged, if you will, in terms of the workforce, we also see that it happens to Latinos and African Americans a lot more than their counterparts of white and Asians. I'm not sure if Lucy, did you want to share anything else about this slide?
The only thing I would share is that data also shows that this is extremely relevant in the state of Maryland, particularly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dr. Nash, next slide, please. So we did not want to leave this as a tabula rasa or a blank slate. There are some really great things happening at Montgomery College, and so we did want to recognize those interventions that are already happening. Many of you already joined me and a whole bunch of my colleagues last year, pre-COVID, when we gathered together on the Germantown campus and had a male students of color summit. And a lot of amazing speakers, a lot of amazing energy. And so we already have that opportunity where we brought together a lot of amazing people, a lot of people with specific interventions and specific opportunities of ideas that they were sharing with us to help improve these numbers so that we could be on the forefront, so that we can be at the helm of this solution and not necessarily just relegate ourselves to being problem talkers about her, if you will. Next slide, please. Currently, many of you know the Boys and Men program that happens across all campuses. And what excites me about the Boys and Men program is I'm hoping that, especially in the breakout rooms, maybe if you have not been able to connect with them, maybe you can see some of your work convergences happening to strengthen some of the current programs that we have. And then more importantly, thanks so much for already moving me on, Dr. Nash. There's a future intervention. And so I'm not sure if you've heard in the whisperings of Zoom about the Black Alliance for Transformative Leadership battle. And so that is a multi-tiered systems of support program that we're trying to bring on the campus of Montgomery College. And more importantly, it's to reinforce this idea of multi-tiered systems of support. Is how do you get the universal supports wrapped around the students that are most vulnerable? How do you get the targeted supports wrapped around the students that are most vulnerable? How do you get the specific, intrusive, intensive supports wrapped around students who need And so I'm excited that we're not necessarily just talking about it at Montgomery College. We are absolutely doing some of this great work. And so I'm excited moving forward into the breakout rooms about all the wonderful ideas that we're going to hear of how you can partner, how you can think about this complex situation and come up with real plausible solutions that can be scaled. Next slide. And I think I'm gonna have a duet with Lucy on this one. We've been talking, and actually this is absolutely an amazing brainchild of my co-partner in the work. And we were also thinking about an intervention that was specific to writing groups. And so we've already been thinking, especially in our subcommittee, about ways to engage, ways, as Dr. Nash said, to make African-American males and Latinx students feel more a part of the campus, more a part of the community, almost like an increased sense of their belonging. However, all ideas are welcome and we're excited to share. Another thing that I want to highlight about this writing group is that it has the opportunity for not only to engage and increase academic writing, but there was also some talks about making a journal or diary of sorts where self-care can be a part of the kind of baked in solution or baked in intervention for these marginalized groups. And so we're always thinking about how we can kind of wrap around supports and services and interventions for these marginalized populations. However, the thing that excites me most about today is hearing from you all also. Next slide. I think I'm going to pass this on to Lucy now.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lucy Grinnell. I'm the acting manager of the Writing, Reading, and Language Center at the Rockville campus. And I've been with Montgomery College since 2013 as a part-time faculty in Women's and Gender Studies and in English. And in reference to the last slide that Brandon just so wonderfully discussed with you, we will be sending out more information on those opportunities with, for writing groups with African American male and Latinx students next week, so keep your eyes open for that. So these are just a few examples of past and future initiatives that respond to PACEI Goal number 1. So we are now going to turn to a recap of our 5 objectives, and then we'll go into breakout sessions to discuss how your area of the college can contribute to fulfilling these objectives. So to recap, our PACEI Goal 1 relates most directly to these objectives, which we are focusing on discussion of in this session. Number 1, an increased number of African American male and Latinx students who graduate, transfer, and complete. Hiring, retention, and promotion of African American male and Latinx full and part-time faculty. Number 2, to assess and measure student experience and sense of belonging at the college. Number 3, to foster empowerment and a sense of belonging among specific diverse populations at the college. Next slide, please. The 4th objective aligned with our goal to improve Montgomery College's college leadership's knowledge, skills, and awareness of racial and cultural issues. The 5th aligned with our goal, training for student success, improve persistence, retention, and graduation transfer of all students, especially those of African American male and Latinx students, through developing an academy for Latino and Black male students for tutoring, mentoring, etc. And then this is a separate but aligned point in this objective, and creating, supporting multicultural inclusion center spaces to serve as hubs for training, dialogue, events, and celebrations on each campus. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the discussion questions that we would like for you to address in your small groups. The first one is, how does this goal relate to your area within the college? The second, what do you see as your role in helping to implement this goal? Third, what do you see as challenges to effectively implementing this goal besides pushback from some employees? 4, what do you believe are some specific strategies to implement this goal? And lastly, what are some ways to hold people accountable to adhering to and or implementing this goal? So our hope is that each group will discuss all 5 questions. However, please plan to report back on your group's discussion of the question that correlates with your breakout session number. And if we have more than 5 breakout sessions, if you are group number 6 or 7, for example, then you get the pleasure of picking one to report back on. But otherwise, do the report back to us on the number that correlates with your breakout session room. But do please try to go through all the questions in your group.
So if each group could maybe report out some of your highlights, is that okay?
Yeah.
So do we want to start with group 1? We could have somebody volunteer to report highlights of the discussion.
I took some notes. Do you want me to do it that way?
Awesome.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So we were focusing on question 1. And so I just took notes on a couple of different things we mentioned. We kind of, because I work with Lucy and the Learning Centers, we iterated the writing studio that she's going to pilot this fall, focusing on Black and brown males. So we think that's going to be a really good place for study skills, writing skills, and community building. That's also the focus, helping students kind of just hang out together and be in a facilitated environment where the students can just enjoy being together. Number two, we had someone from Elite mention teaching, running more sessions on instructional practices, specifically culturally responsive teaching, and some universal design could also be a part of meeting the goal. We had someone from Raptor Central who talked about adding tags to the emails, the automated replies that go out, whether it's announcements about activities or something specific to target the population of students. Another member of our group is working on a project with Dr. Pollard, Presidential Scholars for Men of Color, and she's going to talk to us more at some point about the details of that group because it's just working its way through. We also had someone, I'll be quick, I'm almost done. We also had someone from the website who talked about how making the website more accessible so students don't have to search so much to get what they're looking for. And that can be terribly helpful. The keywords that we put in differ for all of us. So maybe kind of assessing the keywords that students, particularly this population of students we're talking about, will put in to search something. I think that was a fascinating idea. And then we got into a little bit of challenges and accountability. And one of the things about accountability was some reports and updates, not unlike the information we've received from PACEI. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. So can we have group two?
Sure, I can speak for group two. We looked a lot at the question of the role that faculty can play in supporting students, especially Black male students and Latinx students, and finding a way to target the kind of the culture or students not being prepared for the college culture, and making sure that faculty are well equipped for addressing this. And if faculty do not have, knowledge about how to integrate with these resources in their classes, to train faculty to do that. We also talked about maybe ensuring that students have access to mentors, maybe some of their peers. I know there are different programs already, but really making this perhaps more integrated for all incoming students. That goes a little bit beyond the support that students get from counselors and advisors, in a way that allows students to approach someone with all types of problems that they have. Some other thoughts that we had were looking at some of the potential challenges of going back to the faculty point of ensuring that faculty take responsibility and lead the fight for equity in our classrooms, particularly with these populations that might not be succeeding as well. And so we, discussed the potential for how do we include that in evaluations. Otherwise, there's some similarities with what was mentioned in group one, so I won't repeat that.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot, group two. Group three?
So I was just starting to type into the chat about what we talked about. We had a ranging discussion, didn't get through all 4 questions, of course, but we talked about advising for the targeted populations and ensuring that there's early intervention to increase success and connection to the institution and graduation with fewer loss of credits. We talked a little bit about the transfer data that is abysmal for the number of lost credits students, particularly Black males, have. We talked about the expansion of OERs and trying to make OER more visible and have it in more places so that we could increase access to courses and reduce costs. We talked about financial aid and the financial aid rules being used to help students narrow and focus and lose fewer credits. And so that's a measure that's put in place to support students. We talked about the variety of resources and connection points there are for students, such as Boys to Men and other sort of group supports where Black and Brown students can connect with peers. We talked about how we could look at, or how from an HR perspective, how more staff and faculty and student inclusivity activities could happen. I'm trying to think. So those were sort of the positives and the sort of like ideas that we had sort of moving forward. Some of the barriers that we saw, again, were, you know, OER exists, but there's not as much of a continued push for it. There's not as much awareness, especially because things have changed a fair amount, you know, a fair amount with the scheduling. And so sometimes the OER classes don't get identified. So we need to, you know, keep our eyes on that. We talked about, you know, some of the difficulties with transfer because of the course numbering systems, and that's a barrier that we can maybe not always control. We talked about, I raised an issue around, you know, sometimes the students don't understand the messages that they get from financial aid or from other areas, and oftentimes sort of we're sending messages from different places and they're not always understandable for students and they don't know how to follow up. And those messages often come at times when it's peak advising or peak time. And so the more kinds of resources and supports we can put in place that will help students interpret them, and maybe even having students help us write those messages would be a really good idea. And then finally, we talked a little bit about, from the accountability standpoint, the numbers and the fact that at the program level, the dean level, and, you know, in our academic areas, we are being pushed on a variety of very clear numbers, and we're getting data that shows us how various populations are performing and what's happening. And so with that regular access to that data, it's really helpful for us to stay accountable, but not everybody has access to that data. And sometimes it's inconsistently presented because it's coming from different sources. And so if there were a way to have a really clear dashboard that was consistently updated, that everybody had access to and knew where to find it, as opposed to it coming out in various emails at various points, that was talked about as a barrier. So group 3, anybody else want to add anything? Did I miss anything? Or misrepresent anything, which would be worse?
You did a good job, Samantha.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I like the idea about data. I'm a big fan of that one. Thank you, group 3. So can I have somebody from group 4? And by the way, keep in mind, we've got 27 minutes, so you don't have to hurry.
Okay, I am the speaker for group 4. The members were Margaret Latimer, James Nates, David, Kimberly, Rachel, and myself. The idea that, was discussed in 2 levels, strategically, and then going more into tactical things. The first part was strategic, and we wanted to promote the idea of assisting faculty with best practices in the classroom and allowing faculty to share their thoughts and strategies, creating cultural awareness of what students bring to the classroom, because we perceive a disconnect in that area. Kindness and when addressing students in class, finding common grounds in interaction in class, being aware of the language used in class to address students, since depending on the language, it may create a disengagement of the student. People must be aware of their biases. And I think training part-time faculty in that area, or continue training part-time, faculty in general in that area would be great. Setting clear expectations for faculty, students, and the college as a whole will create a common ground to participate and to promote this goal. We review ACES goals, and within their ACES is completely aligned with this goal. And the learning centers also are aligned with this goal. Then we focus, as I said, in matters related to classroom activities, and recommending calling students by their proper name and paying attention on how to pronounce their name correctly is important. Also, smiling is a positive trait. a welcoming gesture makes a big difference. Listen to the different perspective. VPs, deans, directors, their role is to really listening to everyone, to have a constructive criticism and hold people accountable when they are accountable. Academic affairs should have it was a recommendation, training on how to establish and foster a welcoming climate for everybody, and honoring individuality while paying attention to everyone. So it was like a brainstorming, and this is what the group offers to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Those are some fantastic suggestions. Thank you so much for that feedback. So shall we go on to group 5?
I can report back for group 5, and then anybody else in the group, if you want to add anything I may have forgot in. Before we got into talking more about question 5, some of the group members had some very good questions, and we talked a little bit more about how the data indicates lower success rates for African American male students and Latinx students in general, regardless of gender, and how the data, we talked a little bit, wondering more about how the data is assessing differences in gender differences in success rates for both those groups. And we were wondering if there is more updated data than the data that we used in the PowerPoint. And I think that from what I know, the iPads data is a little delayed in getting released. So it'll be interesting to look at the new iPads data when it comes out to see if it's still consistent with what we have so far in terms of looking at those two groups. Yeah. Another person had a really good question about how the college measures or knows if a student is intending to graduate or not. Because we do have students that come to MC with the intention to just take a few classes in order to get into another degree program, et cetera. And so I didn't have an answer to that question. So maybe somebody else here does. In terms of question 5, we talked, in question 5 is looking at what are some ways to hold people accountable to adhering to and implementing this goal. And our group talked about how we need more accountability in general, how there are trainings and workshops, but how do we move beyond the first step of having faculty and staff go and to being held accountable for addressing inequities, particularly that relate to African American male students and Latinx students. Are there ways that we can better evaluate staff and faculty in terms of their commitment to this goal? Let's see. People suggested creating a tool in order to do this for managers and supervisors to be able to assess this more, having a more explicit question on the performance review, and also a consequence. Like, what if the person has not done anything to improve or change their perspective to be more equitable and inclusive? Is there any sort of repercussion for that? Does anyone want to add more to that, what I stated? Or did I summarize that well enough?
I think you summarized it real well, Lucy. Thank you. I think along with that, we actually said, like, what can we actually see? Is there an action plan? And as Lucy said, we have lots of access to great training support, high-level college goals. What are we actually doing? And that's where the assessment should come. And I thought that was a real strong comment as well from the group saying, you know, we should be able to assess this. And then what are you going to do about that? And that's not a new thing to do in a performance evaluation, but it is at a high level. Yeah, two or three times in a row, it's not going the right way, you're not doing anything, then it becomes a higher level issue.
So fantastic. So thank you for that report out. I mean, I think, you know, from the feedback I'm hearing so far, I think you all could have probably written the roadmap because these are really great suggestions. In fact, some of these ideas actually align with objectives that are actually in the roadmap. For example, you know, changes to evaluation, adding questions that are more explicit about, you know, commitment to these goals. These are all great ideas. Do we have, how many more groups do we have?
Group 6 hasn't gone yet, Dr. Nash.
And group 7.
We have 2 more groups. Okay, so group 6, it looks like you're up.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Nash. I'll take the lead, and if I stop dribbling, anybody from group 6 could pick up the ball and start bouncing it for me. In short, we had such a really rich conversation specific to the solutions. So now that we have the data, and to Richard's point about the doing of it all, we have the data, we know the problem, it's here, it's in our face, so what are we going to do about it? And so in group 6, we had such a wonderful, rich conversation around interventions and supports that we can put in place to improve the outcomes of Latinx students and African-American males. And so some of the things, I'm not going to share too long, but some of the things that I heard were developing space for a specific academy centered for marginalized students. I thought that was brilliant. Utilizing the Learning Center. I know that there's been already conversations around how do you employ more students, marginalized students at the Learning Center. So almost creating almost like a fellowship program to make sure that they not only feel included monetarily, but also academically. But that was brilliant. Other things that I heard was ensuring that the CLEP exam, which gives you 9 credits, is expanded and shared across the entire college community. And I think that kind of dovetails to another point that happened in our room. Oftentimes we have so many wonderful supports, so many wonderful resources, so many wonderful everything, but our students just don't know enough about it. They don't know about it. And so where is that one-stop shop where they can go for those resources and those pieces of information to help them persist and work on their retention efforts? Because a lack of awareness is a big problem. Also, some things that I heard was ensuring that there's a monthly meeting space, a physical space or a virtual space now, right? A virtual or a physical space where marginalized students can come together with food and work on some issue beyond academics. So where is a social justice component? Where is a social significant component or a social element component? So that also came up. Another thing that came up was ensuring that there's more codification, if you will, of student clubs. So how do you get more marginalized students into these club spaces so that they have that sense of belonging and they don't start feeling othered? We also talked about a part of that social justice piece, especially with what's coming up now in November, like how do we kind of capitalize on this need to vote and making sure that their voices are heard and underscoring that point of like, this is an important process of your citizenship. And so how do we kind of make sure that that ensues and goes forward? We also talked about a whole bunch of other things, but I guess the last thing that I want to end on is this idea of there's so many good things. I'll stop with mentorship. I'll start with mentorship. So ensuring that everyone, especially through the first year seminar, I'll do first year seminar. So making sure that our student, I literally have been writing so many good notes. I mean, group 6 is the bomb, y'all. Yes, I said that in front of everybody. So we talked about first year seminar. And first year seminar could be a really rich space in order to really collect marginalized voices, marginalized narratives, to ensure that we understand from a college perspective, we understand our students and our students understand us. And so just capitalizing on that first year seminar piece would be probably instrumental and more impact, have more impact, especially for the students that we serve. I'm going to give back the balance of my time to the good Dr. Benjamin from instructional dean.
Wait, how did you know I'd be the one talking for my group?
I had a feeling, Dr. Benjamin. I had a feeling.
No, what we learned in Group 7 is we're scared of Christopher Moy, man. Wow, brother. Wow, great stuff. It was a very, very passionate and well a coherent discussion that we had. We went all in on question 5 about accountability. And one of the things that we talked about was the realization that cultures reproduce themselves. So this lack of accountability that's been reproduced in Montgomery College, hey, we're gonna name it. This lack of accountability that has been reproduced within Montgomery College has served somebody. Whether it's conscious to us or not, and it could be some of us. The lack of accountability is how stuff hasn't gotten done, and to reproduce this culture. So to now start talking about intentional accountability is going to be an inherently disruptive act for this culture. And so when people start talking about holding people accountable, it's holding people accountable for some positive disruption, but we will be held accountable for it. And it's that need to move beyond the courageous conversation and start engaging into some courageous actions. And so what we talked about were, we identified 3 different types of accountability. One was the accountability for planning events and creating these spaces. And we can have people in charge doing that, and we can make sure that these are available. But as also as people were talking about, there is we can create these spaces, we can create these opportunities, but there's also what I have in my notes is the accountability for participation is not the same as the accountability for practice. You can participate, you can check this off of your multicultural awareness required training. But what do you actually, hey, we can even get a t-shirt and a ribbon and we can put it on our surgical masks. But what are we actually doing intentionally engaging and supporting these young Black and brown men that we are talking about? And one of the problems is that we took for accountability and then the last thing we talked about was the accountability, and what we focused a lot on was you can measure this stuff. The accountability of empirical outcomes. These needles can be moved, and we talked about, for example, the work that the country has done over the last 35 years around girls in STEM and K through 12 education. We identified it, we went to work on it, and we've clearly demonstrated some outcomes. The same level of intentionality can be shown to the populations that we're talking about here. So what we said was, we have to make sure that this doesn't become in terms of accountability, a graduate school seminar where we just talk about a lot of great ideas. No, we're actually talking about putting these into practice so we don't die the death of 1,000 cuts, and that we don't reinforce talking over the reinforce acting. So what we said is break it down to objective tasks, targeted interventions with clear empirical benchmarks, multiple interventions, and access. We cannot expect one thing to hit a home run. There's not going to be plan X that's going to save every young brother at Montgomery College. It's going to be multiple access, multiple opportunities, and not to expect these 20 to 30%, increases in student success overnight. We're going to talk about sustained 2%, 3% over years, in decades, in generations, because we're starting to see the outcomes of it with girls in STEM. These 2 to 3% gains absolutely add up to a tipping point. We also talk, again, education of realistic goals, but part of the accountability that we talked about was writing these empirical outcomes, not talking about it, empirical outcomes into performance evaluations and into hiring practices. Believe it or not, there's people who do this work, and there's people who've been successful in this work, and they would love to come to Montgomery College and participate in essentially this disruptive movement, what we are talking about. And I like, as one of our student voices said, with support, it's phenomenal. Without support, it'll be scary. So that was it.
Okay. Group number 7, last but certainly not least. Thank you so much for that.
Great group.
Fantastic. Good stuff. One thing I do not want to forget, so I'm going to go ahead and do this before I forget it, is set up for next week's town hall.
While you're doing that, Dr. Nash, I do have a question for the people that are on this call. So we're trying to obviously maximize participation and and really even more so than participation, it's that people actually read the roadmap and then do something in it. And I would like all 2,900, however many of us are at the college, to commit to doing, one or helping to achieve one objective in the roadmap. And this is a 5-year roadmap. But my question is, I've scheduled these for Fridays at lunchtime because it seemed to be a time where not too much was going on. But it has come to my attention that evenings might be a good option for some people. Do you, either yourself or other people that you may work with, do you have any opinions on an evening time to do these sessions?
Evenings will be great, Sharon. Speaking for assessment centers, we are student services, and usually mornings and early afternoons is dedicated to students. And so I'm sure there are other units, other people in this call that represent units that are also doing the student services throughout the mornings and stuff. And so the scheduling staff members to cover different areas is a little tricky, but definitely the afternoon will be a little more flexible for some of them to attend and participate. Yeah.
Thank you for that. We'll try and keep that in mind, and maybe have an overview where we talk about it's sort of a free-for-all where people can just sort of popcorn in on their thoughts about all the goals. So we'll try to do something.
And Sharon, Dr. Lattimore also mentioned that Fridays are packed these days. Some evenings are booked, others are open. It might be hit or miss.
Okay. Thank you. So with that, thank you very much. Dr. Nash, Brandon Wallace, Lucy Grinnell, I appreciate your hard work in leading this goal, and your committee members. I appreciate you all for joining us today. If you have any continued questions or thoughts on how we really integrate this roadmap into the work that we do day to day in the college community over the next 5 years, please do not hesitate to reach anyone in PACEI. Dr. Bonaparte, thank you so much for your leadership. And with that, if there are any more questions, you may ask them now. And if not, we can end the session. Dr. Nash?
I have one comment, if I may. I discovered some training. It's called bystander intervention training. So if someone sees someone being bullied, or because of gender identity, or because of race, it gives you clear steps on how to intervene as a bystander. For personal use, it's free, but they do also do corporate training. So I can send that information if anyone has an interest in it. It was really interesting and just very simple and straightforward and good information.
That'd be great.
I was literally thinking the same thing, like the campaign, if you see something, say something, with Homeland Security. It's almost like if you you know, if you see something, or if if you're with a group of people and you go out to lunch and someone starts making some jokes that are totally inappropriate, you know, how do you go about, you know, pulling the person aside maybe and saying, hey, you know, that's really offensive. You know, it seems like there's a lot we could do just on the encouraging people to intervene. You know, same with the Title IX stuff. We have bystander training for, you know, if you see someone being assaulted, you know, so maybe there's some bystander training for this, like Carol suggested.
This is Feezy Halim. I'm hesitant to make a suggestion for something that's may sound too outlandish, but is it possible that the college would be interested in doing something similar to What Would You Do? I don't know if everybody's familiar
Yes.
with that show, but if there's a way to actually demonstrate and then have it, if it's permissible, have it recorded. I mean, I don't know, again, from the rule standpoint, you know, how much we can use real people in certain situations, but to actually enact something that people are captured dealing with it. And in 99% of the cases, they pretty much all do the right thing. I mean, you know, they do what they need to do. I've always thought that show is just incredibly impactful and educational. But if we could do something similar to that, I think other community colleges would welcome the leadership of you know, us being able to demonstrate, because of our diversity, how we handle whatever happens to come up, because there's just so many countries and representation. I mean, there's just so much to choose from that we could have scenarios going on from now till forever. So it's just that I don't know what the logistics and you know, legal issues and ramifications would be, but I just think it would be very helpful for other people to see us actually do something and involve them in it.
Man, Fizzy, that is amazing. I love that idea. I don't know the ramifications either, but we'll find out. I think it's a great idea, though.
I don't know what we'd call it, but I tell you what, if it actually catches on, oh my gosh, I forgot his name already. The host of the show, isn't that awful? But I mean,
you're gonna have to get in touch with me afterwards so we can talk about this.
Okay, thank you.
Who is it? Wait.
Quinones?
Quinones.
He was the speaker.
Right.
He was the speaker at the
presidential
event,
dialogue, right?
a year or two ago.
Yeah, I just, oh well, anyway, sorry. I think it's a great show, but.
That's great. Thank you, Fizzy, for that. Any other comments, suggestions that anyone would like to leave us with? We have 1 more minute. And if you have not, please complete the survey. If you have any additional suggestions, you can always add it in the survey. This has been a tremendous session. Kudos to our facilitators. Kudos to the folks that attended for just adding to this rich discussion. And we hope that you'll join us again at our next session next Friday. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And please share the word with the rest of your colleagues to attend. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye.